let's talk about what it's really like to sell a roofing business, especially if you're a small business, if you're not like a regional player. This is a conversation that we need to have because there's a lot of people out there doing the scale and sell thing to you, and then they're making it seem like selling is super easy. Everyone's just going to snatch you up. It's no problem. So then I end up having conversations about, like, with a lot of misperceptions about how it really works. So this is how it really works. The first thing and I'm going to do beginning to end and all the kind of gory details and things that can go wrong because this happens. And if you're like, well, that won't happen for me, because I know what I've got. You got to come down here, Joe, to see it, and then you'll understand. Well, that's not going to fly with a buyer. So we need to talk about really how it works. So the first thing is you're going to give me a call. You're going to book some time with me. We're going to talk about your business. Ultimately, I'll tell you the truth. The thing that really matters at this stage is, and if you just want to kind of cut to the chase, you can just send me your financial statements, your profit and loss, and your tax returns. And the first step is like, all right, this is how a buyer will look at what you're worth. Because some stranger who's like potentially going to give you a million, 2 million, $3 million, they actually don't want to start with all your story and personal background and all the sweat that you put into it. I mean, like, before I give you $3 million, I want to know that this business will make that money back for me, right? Like, that's kind of table stakes. So ultimately, at the end of this first conversation with me, that is kind of the key thing to do next. Otherwise, you're just kind of telling me a story and we're having a conversation about your business, which is cool. Like, if you just want to book time with me to talk about your business, we can do that. If you're really serious about selling, that is going to be the next step. But in this initial conversation with me, just tell me about your business, what you focus on, what your cost per square is, what your relationships with your subs are, who are your project managers, do you have foremen, do you have an administrator, do you use Job Nimbus, do you use Service Titan? And the most important thing at this stage, and this is true for the whole process, maybe you don't tell me these things in the beginning, but you need to, is just be upfront about what your business is and what it does, what it doesn't do, and who does what, and if they're good or not. Because you don't need to sell me on your business. That's my job later. Like, I'm not buying it from you. I need to know what is really going on so I can position it well and then sell it to someone else in a way that if they discover, and they will discover everything that you think that you want to paper over, they're going to find out about it. And then later it's just going to be a conversation about, why didn't you just tell this to me? So for example, don't tell me, oh, everything runs itself as turnkey, Joe, and like, I barely do anything. If you end up doing a lot, just tell me that. If you do a lot and your spouse runs your books and sends out invoices and does customer calls and you don't pay them, that's fine. Just tell me that, right? I just need to understand what is going on so that I can say, all right, this business is good for an existing roofing contractor who already has someone to do all these things, or a buyer who's an individual wanting to get into roofing. These are the things that you're going to need to do rather than them later discovering this when they're in their office after they've given you a letter of an intent and put the business under contract to buy. And then they have exclusive rights to look at this business, your business. And they say, oh, well, I didn't know the spouse was doing this much. I'm out. We've just wasted so much time. So just tell me what's going on and how it works. Don't tell me, oh, my sales team is great. And if they're not, then just tell me that they're not. I'm not here to judge you on like what's going on. I've had a business. I've had employees who weren't that great. I get it. So the first thing is just tell me about your business. Tell me about how you work. How do you get sales? Who does what in the business? Again, just tell me what's going on. And also, most importantly, because before you share your financials with someone you want to get comfortable with them, spend the time asking me questions. What do you need to know about me, how the process works? Hopefully this video helps you, but get yourself in a space where you're like, okay, I'm comfortable sending you financials, Joe, so that you can tell me how much you think the business is worth. So that's step one. Now, if you're already coming to me and you already think and if you think and that answer is, I think it's worth 5, 6, 7 or higher times my revenue, my profitability, like, you don't need me, because that's probably not true unless you're truly like a regional player or a statewide player. If you are within a single market roofing contractor, we're probably talking about you'll probably sell somewhere between 2.5 to 4 times your profitability. And, I can walk you through like all that math and how it works. But essentially, that is going to be the answer to the test. But in the conversation with me, I'm trying to understand like, all right, how good are your systems? Because if you got really good systems and really good people, then you'll sell at a higher rate. But again, we want to be honest about it. And again, this valuation and how much it's worth is a different conversation than how to price it. We're always going to want to price it a little bit over where we think we're actually going to sell it for, because any buyer will want to feel like they're winning in the negotiation. And so we have the advantage of being the first mover. So we can set it up so that we are going to get a price that we like, that we think is fair, and let the buyer feel like they're winning. Everyone feels like they're winning. That's kind of the magic of what a broker brings to the table as an intermediary, makes everyone feel like they're winning. So we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to go back. I'm going to do evaluation. I'll kind of give you an idea of what I think it's worth. I'm going to do all this math on the back end and like track your financials and have everything ticked and tied together in really nice spreadsheets, which you don't really care about. I get it. But a buyer will care about it, because there's a big difference between you saying, this is how I perform financially, and someone showing them who has a lot of financial acumen. That is the difference. Again, it's, would you just give someone a big check because they've just promised you that the financials are really good? And then if they just handed you raw financials and tax returns, are you going to be able to interpret that effectively to say, yes, it's definitely worth that? There's nothing hiding in here. I can help do that communication. And that's why this step is important and why it's worth going through this exercise, even if we kind of know what the final answer is. It's like in a math test. We know what the final answer is, but we still need to show our work so someone can verify that we weren't cheating. So we're going to do that. We are going to then have more conversations about your business, because eventually, once I tell you how much it's worth and how it works and all these other things in the process, we're like, all right, look, you got to make a decision. Are you going to sell your business? And if you're going to sell your business, are you going to work with me? Because as much as I like talking to you, if you don't want to list with me, that's fine. Go somewhere else or don't do it. But we need to get to a decision, right? I don't want to belabor this whole process. So say you're going to list with me, we'll sign a listing agreement, I'll send you the terms, and then we need to put together the marketing packet. And by we, I mean, I am going to do that, but from you, I need you to now really tell me everything. You've told me everything, but now I should say better, you need to show me everything. So you have a bunch of equipment. I need to see, what is that list of equipment. If you have photographs of it, let's get some photographs. If you lease a space to park your equipment, we need to get the lease. Like, all of these things may not necessarily, like, no one, we're not going to market the lease agreement. We're not going to, well, we are going to market, here's all the equipment that you get with it. People need to know that. And when they're interested, they're going to ask for those details. And so we just need to be ready with that, right? So we're gathering all these things that we're going to need later that we are also going to feature in our marketing materials as to why this is a great business. So it's both a qualitative discussion of how great your business is, as well as gathering the documentation that will need to be used later to verify. And so I can present that in a confidential document. So we're going to build all those marketing materials in a nice confidential packet. And then once we're ready with that, we're going to go to market. Now, I would say the marketing materials and the way your business is communicated to a third party buyer, maybe to a financial buyer who cares about numbers, even to a strategic buyer who is maybe someone in your industry that kind of knows all the ins and outs well. And we still need to present things clearly to them. No offense, but we cannot present it in the way you present your business to me. I get it. I love it. I'm all for it. That's how I do business. But then when I go and present to someone else who is potentially writing a multi-million-dollar check, they want to know that things are nice and presentable and transparent, right? So I kind of do the transformation. And this is where already you're starting to, would you pay, for your business if you presented to someone else and you just told them about it, versus if I gave them a whole confidential packet about it with everything in a secure data room? Same business. Which one are you going to pay more for? You're going to pay more for the one that you feel like is more transparent. There's going to be less surprises. So I'm already kind of earning my keep, if you will, at this stage of the process by building the marketing materials. But then the other thing right before we go live is that, I am going to have a non-disclosure agreement ready for potential buyers to sign. So then they only see the confidential details of your business once they sign that NDA. I'm going to put things in a data room that is secure. So these are, unless you are going to send NDAs, read through buyer profiles, manage all of this, this is again like why you want someone to be managing this process for you, because otherwise it's a pain in the butt. And like, could you sell your house yourself? You absolutely could. Are you probably going to get a real estate agent to just kind of do the work for you? You probably are. So again, this is where I'm starting to add value to you. And if you're like, no, I don't want to use a broker, I just want to know how it works. Okay, well, you need to get an NDA in place and like send that to buyers and have that set up. And then probably you want to have a system where you're not just like sending out all your documents willy nilly. You want a process for that. So that's my piece of advice there. So I'm going to get inquiries and they're going to ask me a bunch of questions. I'm gonna be like, you need to look at the documents. And they're gonna be like, oh, I see it now, but I still have more questions. I'll be like, great. I've talked to the owner of the business. Joe, know the business pretty well. I'm gonna answer 80% of your questions. And then that 20% that maybe I'm not really sure on the answer for or I want to verify, I'm gonna roll those up from multiple buyers and be like, hey, you need to answer these questions, client, my friend, seller, so that I can go relay this. And really what I want to do is I want to get them to a point where it's like, okay, buyer, you know everything you need to know to understand if you still want to make an offer on this business and what kind of deal structure or price range you're currently interested in. And if you're interested in a range that's within striking distance of what we're asking for and expect, then let's go meet with the buyer. Now, again, so I'm screening this for you. You're not dealing with every single buyer who just like looks through everything and is like, oh, okay, I'm out. That's going to happen. That's fine. You don't want to deal with that. I'll deal with that. They'll say, all right, seller, roofing owner, we need to meet with this potential buyer. I'm just going to warn you up front. They are going to ask a lot of the questions that I've already asked you, then you've already told me. That's part of the process. If I tell someone, hey, the sales team is great, they're going to be like, cool. I want to hear it from the owner in their own words. So just be prepared that you'll have to kind of answer these things again. Just people want to hear from the horse's mouth. That's all. So you're going to talk to multiple buyers probably. And then after that, buyers often are going to be like, well, I have all these other questions. Let me see this. Let me see that. Let me see all your invoices. Let me see into Job Nimbus. Let me see into Service Titan now. And I'm going to say, no, we're not going to do that right now. If you want to go into all that, you want to make this because it's painful. Look, once you have an offer and we're getting close to closing, this is painful to do because they're going to be up your butt about everything. So part of my job is to say, all right, buyer, look, I'll show it all to you, but you need to make an offer. You need to tell me that you actually want to buy this business and like under what terms. And if there are certain things you need to see to like finalize and formally submit that offer, great, we'll get it to you. But you're not going to go on a fishing expedition unless you are making a commitment to us to buy this business. That commitment is in the form of what's called a letter of intent. It's just a document that says, yeah, I want to buy this business and this is what I'm going to do. And it actually is a non-committal. There's only 2 binding clauses in a letter of intent, but it's still an escalation of commitment. And that's what we're trying to get them to. And we're also trying to screen out people who are not willing to make a non-binding commitment. Because if they're not willing to make a non-binding commitment around a purchase price, then they're not going to buy. And we don't need to show them all your Job Nimbus reports, payroll reports, et cetera. So I'm going to ask them for a letter of intent. I'll make a commitment, and then, I'll work with you. Be like, hey, let's negotiate the key parts of this offer so that we are all working towards a deal structure. Maybe there's a certain amount of seller financing, maybe just purchase price overall. Maybe there's a certain amount of equity that you're going to keep later that's part of this deal. Like we're going to want to make sure that those like big details are figured out in this letter of intent. So they're going to submit that, this actually takes a couple of weeks to do sometimes because we'll be going back and forth because we're not about to let them just like go through all your records in diligence until we know we actually are trying to say that this is the deal that we're going to do. So that's one thing where I help of being like, all right, this is what this letter of intent means. Or in some cases to the buyer who really maybe knows roofing, but they've not really bought a business before, or maybe it was just their buddy's business that they bought last time, or just like handshake agreement and then like some cash. Like that's not going to be good for a formal transaction between 2 parties who don't really know each other. So I'm going to help them like, all right, here's what your letter of intent needs to say. These are things that we need to just discuss now rather than later. Like how much cash are we leaving in the business for them to operate? Any? Okay, well then this is how much cash then you buyer need to bring to the table. How are we going to handle work in progress jobs where maybe you, the seller, have already received a deposit, but haven't completed the work. Maybe we need to define these things right up front, right? Or maybe we can kind of push those later and deal with that as we get closer to a purchase agreement. But I'm going to help you through that process so that we are actually working towards an attainable purchase and deal structure. So once that gets signed, now this is exciting. Like we are maybe 30 to 45 days away from closing on this business and you getting a check and getting out. So this is where the painful part starts. They're going to look through everything. They're going to look through all your financials. Hey, you're also going to need to pull all your bank statements from the last 12 months because your financials need to be verified against those bank statements. Don't fight me on this. And now if you if you won't provide bank statements to verify the financial, that deal's done. So don't complain about it, please. I know it's a pain. I'm telling you right now that it's a pain. It is just, this is a verification step that needs to happen. Here's the other thing. If you have in your financials a line that says credit card because you expense personal things to the business and that's how you know it's like a personal expense, that's fine. When we present it to a buyer, we're going to be like, hey, these were, personal meals, merchandise that we bought at Christmas. There really wasn't a $10,000 expense last year. It was just things for the owner themselves that maybe they ran through the business. Be prepared to show credit card statements because we need to prove that that wasn't a critical business function that was paid for in that credit card. Now, those are actually kind of the easier parts. So we're not even at the worst part yet. I'd say the worst part, and this is something that you can start doing today if you want to sell your roofing business in the future, is really know how to use Service Titan and Job Nimbus for reporting. And I guess you do know how to use it. I shouldn't put it that way. But what I'm saying is that if I don't ask you, a buyer will ask you, show me what is in your pipeline for sales and for jobs. So you need to be able to go into Job Nimbus and show these are all of our leads that we're talking to that may be a potential sale right now. Because if you're saying, hey, next month is going to be a huge month, you're going to make a ton of money. All right, show me the Job Nimbus or Service Titan pipeline that says you're working on a bunch of contracts. What jobs have we received a deposit for or are out right now or have recently closed and we're waiting to receive our final payment on? Think about those things and how would you show someone that? Not tell someone, not show them a whiteboard, but if you're using Service Titan or Job Nimbus, show them in that. Find a way to create an export file that tells that story to them and backs up what you're telling them verbally. So while that pain in the butt is going on, there'll be another thing that's a pain from post letter of intent to closing. And that is, we need to start working on a purchase agreement. Remember, the offer that you've received in the letter of intent is non-binding. The only two things that are binding in that letter of intent is that we all agree that we won't talk about the terms of this deal to people and that the buyer has the exclusive right to diligence the business typically. That's it. Those are the only two things that we're legally committing ourselves to in that document. Not that they're actually going to close on this deal. So we need to get there. We need to have a actual purchase agreement that when signed, that is the sale of the business. Now, we need to go get an attorney. We need to get an attorney who is good with M&A. So if you have an attorney you want to use, we can do that. But I would caution that we should probably get, and I have recommendations, an attorney that has experience in small business M&A because they'll know how to do the ins and outs of these things. And we are going to give the letter of intent to that attorney. And then we are going to say, hey, buyer, who's your attorney? And give the LOI to your attorney so that they can make the first draft of the purchase agreement. It is traditional for the buyer to make that first draft, not us. And if we're doing it, we may say, hey, you need to throw us, some dollars somewhere in this final purchase agreement that recognizes that our attorney is doing your role right now, and we're paying the legal fees for that. But usually it's not a big deal. Usually the buyer understands that their attorney needs to make the first draft of that. So the attorneys are going to work in that draft. They're going to point out all these things that indemnity issues, indemnity floors and ceilings, warrants of the officers of the LLCs that are purchasing the business. And there's going to be a bunch of questions to you about hey, do you understand what this is? Their buyer is asking for this. Did you guys talk about that? And we're going to be negotiating some of these details. So this is also where I, as a broker, help you a lot. How do you want to handle work in progress jobs? I have a recommendation. I think that there's something fair. How are we going to handle the inventory? How much inventory do you have? Does the buyer need to pay you for any excess inventory that you're carrying? I think we should be giving them, as part of the deal, the inventory needed to complete the jobs that you've received deposits for. How are we going to handle the bank accounts? What things need to be paid off that you need to pay off versus the buyer needs to pay off? Right. And then there will be more adjustments in the purchase price because we are kind of negotiating these details. If you think, and you tell me, oh, Joe, no, it's going to be simple. They just pay me this and they get everything. That's just you saying that. That is not the reality of how, like, hey, guess what? A buyer also has strong opinions about what they should be paying for and what you should be leaving them in a functioning business to continue operations. They will ask about it, they will negotiate about it, and they often will have these requests and these details run through their attorneys to our attorney. Now I can help get through like, hey, this is just what we should do, keep it simple. Because a lot of times if you don't have an intermediary like me who's not being paid by the hour, you will get upset about why are they asking about these things? Because it needs to be in a legal document that the attorneys are preparing. And they'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. That's unreasonable. This is just how we're going to do it. And then that's going to be relayed to the buyer. And they'll be like, this person is so unreasonable. We need to, and everyone's upset. And no one's really talking to each other. And no offense to my attorney friends, you guys are not the best at mitigating emotions and expectations in this deal. And also, the different attorneys can't talk to the other clients directly. But as an intermediary, I have greater latitude to kind of communicate to all parties, hey, this is what's going on. This is normal. We just got to work through it. We all want the same thing to close this deal. We are all still a happy family because deals will fall. A $3 million deal can fall apart over like a $20,000 question about inventory just because people won't agree and they get upset at each other. It sounds dumb, but it absolutely happens. You'll just get upset and walk away. It happens. So we will be negotiating this. We will be going through diligence all at the same time because if you want to close in 30 days, there's a lot to do. And oh, guess what? There's another thing that I'm helping with that is also happening at the same time. And this is why this is such a stressful time, and deals for roofing businesses will die as we're trying to get all of this across the finish line. Because the third thing that's happening is that we're also negotiating with a lender, and the lender needs specific documents, and we need to give that to the buyer so that they can apply for a loan. And they need to do that right away too. And I will also tell you up front when I look at your tax returns how bankable your deal is. Because if you have a lot of losses in your business, even though in reality you're making a lot of profits in your pocket profits, this is going to be a problem for a bank. But this is again where I can help because I can kind of tell you up front, this is how we need to position and structure this deal so that it can actually be sold and be banked. Or better yet, I can also say, hey, these are some lenders buyer that you should talk to that can do this deal. And they've looked at this deal and they've seen some of the details and they can move a lot faster because they already kind of understand the fundamentals going on. Or this is a bank that kind of they can be comfortable with this amount of seller financing or this rolled equity or whatever, the terms of the deal that we are likely to land on are. I can have lenders ready to go to like have introductions to the buyer and I can prep that ahead of time. So all of these things are happening during diligence. And this is a lot for 30 days. And I'm not even going to go into if you have a lease and we need to negotiate with the landlord and make sure the landlord assigns a lease. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But essentially, there's a lot to happen in 30 days, and this is why it's often extended as we are trying to get to a closing. And then once we get to a closing, finally, once all this is done, we're going to have a closing agent. And that closing agent is going to help do all of the payoffs for this deal. Oh, Joe, all of the payoffs. You mean your fee? That's part of it. But the other part is most of these sales are going to be an asset sale, which means it's debt free, cash free. So you can take all the cash that's in the business that's excess of like what needs to just like get through the next couple weeks. All that cash is yours. But if you have a truck, and this is again in that documentation gathering phase and why it's so important and like saves us time later is if you have a truck that you have a lease on, you need to pay that off because you're essentially saying to that new owner, hey, yeah, this is a truck that's yours to use. You need to give it to them and you can't give it to them until you own it. So you need to pay off the value of that truck. In theory, you could have the new owner take responsibility for the payments on that vehicle, but often the times in the lease agreements, there are not terms for someone else to assume that lease payment. So most often it's you need to take, the buyer will deposit money into an escrow. You need to use those funds to pay off all the debts on the business. So everything that you're selling as part of the business can actually transfer to the new owner. And this is the thing that gets a lot of people. It's like, I thought I was going to have $3 million just cash coming into my bank account. Remember, you today, the net value of the business is not just all this cash you're putting in your pocket. because you still owe all these other people. That doesn't go away just because you're paying them monthly. So if you're going to get a big lump sum for the business for everything in it, guess what? You're often going to have some lump sums of payments that you owe to other people, right? You essentially have been financing the value of this business, and you've got to pay that back at the time of sale. So if you have a bunch of F-250s, whatever, that are part of the business that have, their finance, you got to pay those off, because then those titles need to go to the new owner, and the titles cannot be registered with the new owner until you pay it off and then transfer the title to the person. That's why you need a closing agent to manage the escrow, so that millions of dollars can be deposited into account, and you know that the money is there before, and then you can use that to do the payoffs. The money is dispersed. Congratulations, you've just sold your business. Now you probably will still need to do, as part of terms of the deal, 30 days of transition with the new owner, with the buyer. So it's not just like you walk away. You're still going to have a transition portion of this, and you usually are going to be asked to like provide, just as part of the deal, transition services, and just like, hey, work in the business supervising the new owner and helping them out for 30 days. And then post 30 days, if you're willing, this is now this part is very negotiable. You can be paid a consulting rate for a few more months at a predetermined hourly rate. If the seller is like, hey, or sorry, if the buyer is calling you, the seller is like, hey, I have these questions. Like, I know we sold 60 days ago, but there's this customer, he's asking me about something, then wasn't there for it. So could you walk me through what happened at this account and what happened at this roof? Hey, you may just need to take an hour, and then you'll send them a bill for 150, $200, whatever your hourly rate was for helping with that issue after the sale. So that's the process. And if you think that you can manage the NDAs, manage the marketing, you can call a whole bunch of buyers in private equity or regional roofing buyers or your other competitors or other individuals, and you can get them to sign NDAs, and you can set up a data room, and you can interpret the financials, and you can keep track of everything that's going on in diligence, getting bank statements and making sure everyone's receiving what they were supposed to receive, and get a good attorney to do it, and lenders that you can introduce people to. If you think you can do all of that, you should go do it. If you feel like, "Oh, maybe I should just make Joe do that," you can reach out to me, because I am a roofing business broker and I can help you get this done. And if you don't think you can do all of those things on your own, then all the things where it's like, oh, well, I could just call my buddy up and do it, then do it. Call your buddy up, and if they write you a big fat check and take it over tomorrow, awesome. That is what I want for you. If that doesn't happen, give me a call, and then I'll do all this work for you, and we'll get it done. And I will take that burden off of your life and just say, hey, I just need these 5 things from you this week. Just focus on that, because I'm managing the whole process and worrying about what everybody else is doing.